That's what I thought. That's better. If only I could hear you now. I think we'll wait another minute. Oh, door's closed. Guess we're not going to wait another minute. Nice. Thank you. This is a session about bring your own. So we're going to talk about the new features in Windows 8.1, Windows Server 2012 or 2. We've only got 45 minutes. We do have room and time for questions. So if you have a question, if there's something that you want to dive deeper into, please tell me, and we will. So as you're noticing, I'm not speaking Croatian. That's because I'm not from here. I'm from the Netherlands, which is just a few 100 kilometers to the northwest of here. And I was invited to speak here on 2 sessions. I did a session on Active Directory in Hyper-V and Azure yesterday. And now I'm doing this. I'm a virtual technical evangelist at Microsoft in the Netherlands. And that keeps me well informed and in the offices of very large customers. The experience that I have in those customers, I tend to blog and document on various websites. So everything I'm saying here was already published on the internet. It's just a short recap, if you want. So we're going to talk about the challenges that we're having with bring your own device, challenges with the information strategy, security strategy that we need, and I'm going to quickly go over 4 areas that I feel that you need to address. There's a couple of other areas as well, like data protection that you can use with RMS. There was a session on that yesterday, and I can also advise you to look at licensing. But again, that is a different topic. I can do another session of 45 minutes just on the licensing of Bring Your Own. So we'll just stick to these 4 categories, which is web-ready authentication. I'm going to do that first. Then I'm going to talk about authorization, because group memberships and stuff like that won't cut it in Bring Your Own. Then we're going to talk about data access and client management. So let's start with authentication. No, you know what? Let's start with Bring Your Own, because this is one of the, well, I think it's one of the few things that the Netherlands is actually ahead of the curve in that in the Netherlands, 57% of people between 21 and 32 years of age use their own devices, regardless of the policies and the security information strategies used by the company. Worldwide, it's only 51%. So that means that every 1 in 2 colleagues will use their smartwatch, their smartphones, their own devices and stuff like that to access your company data, your company information. Willingly. And what we see is that if we let people do that, and it's not a problem to let them do that, then your service desk is going to be overwhelmed with a couple of questions that they might not know the answer of, because you have applications for different platforms, you have different settings, you have all different stuff, and you don't know. So what Microsoft did is they've made a model where they've, well, containerized is not the right word, because that has a whole new meaning these days. But what they did is they made a model, and they said, okay, if we have colleagues on one side, or employees, if you want to call them, and devices and the data on the other side, then there's stuff that we need to do. So we need to look at management and access and security and stuff like that. And this model helps you to gain an understanding of bring your own. And bring your own, quite frankly, it's not that hard. If you look at bring your own, you just do it wrong as you are facilitating people to use their own devices or devices from partners and such. So it's your decision as a systems administrator to go as far as you want or as far as your budget allows you to do. So how do you facilitate stuff like that? Well, you've got your own data. That has been there since the beginning of your organization. I'm getting close to the speaker again. Then you've got the apps that you've already used to using for your colleagues and stuff like that. And what we're doing is actually we're bolting on that bring your own device stuff on top of that data, on top of that applications. So if you have users that are used to work in a certain way, you can just let them do that. SharePoint with WebDAV has options to just get disk drives with G and H and K and L and M in them. It can just work. Just SharePoint as the background, for instance. You can do all that stuff. If people want to use Windows 7, go ahead. We still have Active Directory, we still have group policy. We're just bolting on some bring your own stuff on top of that. So what are we bolting on? Well, let's start with authentication. Because I've already mentioned Active Directory, what we can do with Active Directory is quite wonderful if we have Windows devices. If we don't have Windows devices, then we're kind of out in the cold. And even if we have Windows devices, if we have a large networking infrastructure, what you'll see is that SIDS, because that's what Kerberos does, Kerberos moves SIDS around. So if we have memberships of more than 1,023 groups, then normal users will no longer be able to log on. It's the max token size. If we have large enough tokens, they don't get sent around anymore because they're beyond the max token size. And that's because those tokens in Kerberos are encrypted. We can't just hack them up and send them in pieces. Now we have to send them all at once. We can't hack them up. We can't get stuff out of it if we want to, because we have to send everything. There's no way of knowing in Kerberos where a device is, or what it does, or what it's meant to do. Then there's trusts, and if you're a service provider, you'll know that trusts become very, 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 very slow. If you have more than 1,200 trust objects in your Active Directory, you won't be able to log on to trust domains and stuff like that. And multi-factor authentication, I don't know, if you've tried that with smart cards and stuff like that, that stuff is hard in Active Directory. So can we make that easier? Yeah, we can. If we just focus on web-ready authentication, and we don't do Kerberos with TCP port 88 anymore, we don't do SIDS anymore, we just cut out all that crap, and we say, okay, we want to do stuff with open standards. Encryption should be optional. If it's just on my own network, it doesn't need to be encrypted that much. And we need scalable and loosely coupled trust relationships. And if we could, just like Google and Facebook and Hotmail and stuff like that, we want multi-factor authentication. And I might want it just as a checkbox, please. All right. So Microsoft has a solution for that, and it's called Active Directory Federation Services. Anyone heard of it? Anyone deployed it? I had another session, the 10 most common things that we do wrong when we deploy Active Directory Federation Services. Wasn't accepted, but could be a good subject. And what Active Directory Federation Services allows us to do is to authenticate people and authenticate devices using TCP port 80 and TCP port 443. So in my dictionary, those two networking ports, TCP 80 and TCP 443, are the universal firewall bypass ports. Any firewall I know will just let you do HTTP and HTTPS just like that. So if we can use that for authentication, yes please. And if it's based on an open standard, then it should just work with iPads and Android devices and stuff like that. And it does. And the other thing that I want with authentication, and what I get with Active Directory Federation services, is fine-grained relying party trust. So depending on where a device is, depending on what the user or device does or has or is, I can tell it to do multi-factor authentication or just log on and be done with it. So what does that look like? Because I can show you a demo, but it doesn't really stick if you don't know what's happening under the hood. So if a colleague goes to a claims-aware application, so an application that has a relying party trust with my Active Directory Federation services infrastructure, then that application will redirect that colleague to the ADFS server to authenticate. The app knows because it has a relying party trust. So the colleague, whether it's on-prem or just on the internet, then authenticates using username password, and that stuff gets checked in Active Directory, and when it's done correctly, then he gets a claim from the Active Directory Federation server, the Security Token Services, the STS, and the colleague can then get that claim to the app. The app can, if it's encrypted, can decrypt the claim sent here because of the relying party trust and PKI. So there's certs all over the place if you want to. You can leave them behind if you want to, but on the internet it's not such a great idea. But this stuff just works and does not rely on the device. So that's why there's no device in this picture. So what does that look like? Let me just, this stuff is good. Yeah. Oh, I don't even demo this. I think I hit, it's okay. Let's get this stuff done. Because claims are not new. Active Directory Federation Services has been around since Windows Server 2003, R2. So that's why I just asked the question, do you know anything about ADFS? Because you might, because it's been there for 10 years. Furthermore, the first version of Active Directory Federation Services is already being unsupported next month. So what we're seeing is that we have claims in SAML, and SAML is one of the open standards, just like OAuth, that we use with Active Directory Federation Services. And Microsoft has taken that claim language, that robust, that flexible, that claims-based authentication and authorization mechanism to Kerberos as well. So Kerberos was an open standard in the beginning. Then Microsoft embraced it. Microsoft extended it. So now it's no longer compliant with the standard, but at least it works. And one of the things that they've extended is that they've extended claims into Kerberos. So now we have claims in Kerberos, and that stuff is called Dynamic Access Control. And it's available since Windows Server 2012. And then, of course, there's tokens. So this table, and I'm sure that you're going to get the slides after the event, shows you where the differences are. So, for instance, on the transport, we're seeing TCP/88, and here we're seeing those nice bypass protocols. SAML-based versus, I don't know what based. You don't even want to know. Then there's limits with the max token size, and then there's all sorts of security measures. Although Kerberos, at this moment, in the Windows implementation, is still very weak, to say the least. Another thing that we're seeing is an uptick in Azure Active Directory. So even if you have Active Directory Federation services, Azure Active Directory is a complement technology to that. So what you could do is you can use the Azure Active Directory REST-based identity management service that lives in the Azure cloud. You can couple your ADFS infrastructure to Azure Active Directory if you want to, or you can just do a dir sync or synchronization to Azure. And of course, It's based on the same open standards as ADFS does. And supports third parties like ping identity and stuff like that, so you can just go ahead and work with that. So how does that look if you're authentication with ADFS? On-prem, well, the first thing you have is a directory synchronization tool like DirSync or AAD-Sync, and that makes sure that the user objects and group objects that you have in your on-prem Active Directory get known in Azure Active Directory, so that if the Azure Active Directory needs to make authorization and authentication decisions, it can do that with the information that you send to it. Then, of course, you have your ADFS implementation on-prem right here, and the Azure Active Directory has one itself too. You can use that as a standalone. You can make a relying party trust with your own ADFS, and when a colleague goes to the Azure AD integrated application, what you'll see is that the application redirects to Azure Active Directory, and Azure Active Directory, because of the data that you supplied it, will then redirect it to your STS. This is not that hard. It's the double hop implementation of what we've seen before. Well, the STS, of course, gets the password and gets the password for the colleague, checks that with Active Directory, sends back a claim, and that claim is sent to Azure Active Directory, because the Azure Active Directory has a relying party trust with that STS. And then the STS sends you back a claim, and it can actually do claim transformation, so it can add stuff to it. And then you send that claim with everything you want to the Azure AD integrated application. It's so easy when I tell it. But it's kind of a crowded slide. Yeah. It's funny though, because if you remember this slide, then it gets really easy to work with Intune and Azure Active Directory and all that stuff. Because everything that you see, even self-service password reset feature in Azure Active Directory, is all based on this model. Right. Thank you. Oh yeah, if you don't have an information security strategy yet, there's a website for it. So don't make one up, they can do that for you. Nice one. So what I have is an environment with a claims app that I use. Let me just and it's on the hyperexpert.net domain. And I've got a claim app that is claims aware and has a relying party trust to my ADFS server. This is the link to that app, but what you'll see is when I'm accessing it, I'm directly redirected to the ADFS server. So this is what happens. This is what people see in their browser. If you have an opportunity to make your certificates, because in the top right corner you can see that this is an HTTPS connection. If you have extended validation, then this bar will go green, and your colleagues will know that this is the right website. I give the right password, I hope. And this is the app that I have for this demo. And this just dumps all the claim types in the claim itself. So my device got the claim from the STS and then gave that claim to the web app, the claim app. And the claim app then has one job, and that is to list them on this website. So this is the entire content of a claim. This is a default claim with default ADFS in Windows Server 2012 R2. So you see the user principal name right here, the primary group SID, the primary SID. This is my name, my Windows account name, stuff like that. There's a group SID that you can use. These are all the groups that I'm a member of. I can filter that. I can transform that, whatever I want. And the list goes on. a couple of neat things. For instance, this one. This is the stuff that you're gonna see more of in this session. Inside corporate network. That's a claim type. It's a default claim type. And in my case, it's false. So I'm not on the same network as the ADFS server, and the ADFS server knows and will treat me as an external or an extranet person. And I'm gonna do an authorization decision on that later on. So I think now you have a pretty good idea about claims and claims authentication. I think. Right. Let's do something with that. So Azure also has multi-factor authentication. You can buy multi-factor authentication in itself on its own. You can pay per 10 authentications, or you can pay per user per month, per enabled user per month. And it has all sorts of possibilities. And what it does is it combines multiple authentication factors. So you've probably been using this for a couple of years with your bank or with Facebook or with whatever. So the first authentication factor that almost everyone uses is something that you know. So username and password is something that you can prove that you know. Then there's security measures that you can use based on something you can prove that you are. Those are biometrics. So the fingerprint reader, the iris scanner, stuff like that. That is an authentication factor where you prove what you are. Then there's the proof, something that you have. And Google and LinkedIn and Facebook all trust the, I want you to prove that you have your phone with you by using an SMS or a phone call or a one-time password code based on the inner workings of your phone. And then, and this is funny because not many people recognize that, the fourth factor, which is becoming more dominantly the last years, is something someone does regularly. So I'm from the Netherlands. I started my notebook yesterday in my room. I went to Facebook, and Facebook said, wait a minute, normally you log on from the Netherlands. Now you're in Croatia. Okay, just send me your code. All right, here's your code. So I can prove that I know my email address and my password for Facebook. That is what I'm using to log on. Then I can't prove that I do that regularly. So Facebook says, well, show me something you prove you have, like an like access to an email address or access to the one-time password. So this is getting into mainstream technology more and more and more. And it's good because Microsoft has a pretty good product for that. Now the challenges with multi-factor authentication in Windows is that basically only smart cards work. You have a smart card, you insert it into a device, you have to enter a PIN, then the device unlocks the certificate onto the smart card, and you add the smart card, you give it to the security service, and the security service will say, well, now you can prove you have that. Let's go on. They require PKI, so they require certification authorities, loads of certificates. You have to encrypt all the traffic to and from your infrastructure, so it's hard. And it's not very user-friendly. So the demo website that I just showed you, that works on a phone as well. If I'm gonna secure that with a smart card, even though I have a pretty large phone, I have a Lumia 1520, a smart card doesn't fit into it. So it's not very user-friendly for bring your own device scenarios. Luckily, Microsoft has purchased the Phone Factor company about 3 years ago, and what they did is they've rebranded that, and they've built a centralized infrastructure within Azure, and they're saying, okay, well, you can have our product with the Phone Factor logo removed. It's now Azure Multi-Factor Authentication. For Android, it's the Azure Authenticator. In iOS, it's the Azure Multi-Factor Authentication app. You can use that, so you can prove that you have that. Then they have a piece of software that you can install on-prem, and that already knows about smart cards and stuff like that, so it's not that hard. You can just, if you want to use your smart cards, that's okay. Microsoft will support that, but if you want to go really do something with other devices, that's the way to go. Because even though Apple has introduced a fingerprint reader in an iPad, I don't think they'll support smart cards soon. So let's look at the Azure Mfa. I've got the on-prem product installed. On my ADFS server. So this is my ADFS server. This is the, if you have never seen it, this is the ADFS console. And what I have is in ADFS I have authentication policies, and I can define authentication policies per relying party trust. So per application that I configure for my ADFS, I have authentication policies. So let's look at one of those policies. Go to the multi-factor tab, and what you'll see is that, and this is built in, there's an entire claim-based rule language, so you can build whatever you want with this. But built in, there's already the opportunity to distinguish between unregistered devices and registered devices, and I'll show you how to register a device in a few minutes. And there's a decision based on the location, so whether it's extranet or intranet. That's the inside or outside corporate network stuff. So this is really easy. I'll just remove this one. Yeah, demo done. I wanted a checkbox. There's your checkbox for multi-factor authentication. You know what? Can we get back? Because I've got the, this is the interface for phone factor, or the multi-factor authentication server on-prem. And this is the ADFS adapter. So this is the stuff that is used to plug into ADFS and to give you those nice check marks that you just saw. And these are the options that you can use for multi-factor authentication with ADFS. And then there's the company settings that you can use for your entire company for authentication settings. So you can do stuff like give it a text message two-way. And one of the recent additions to this was that you can now have a text message which is one-way. Sounds trivial, but if you have text messages with Azure Multi-Factor Authentication, then you get a text message sent with a code in it, and then you have to reply to the number that sent it to you with the same code in it. So that way, Azure will know where you are and can say, well, I don't think this is going to fly because I saw you about 4 hours ago in New York. Now you're in Croatia. There's no way you can do that logistically. So I'm going to do some fraud detection on that. So all these settings are all in place to just give you that control. Thank you. So how does it work under the covers? If I have an on-prem application, then I can have the on-prem multi-factor authentication server next to my Active Directory domain server, and I have multi-factor authentication service with Microsoft. Now when I access the application, that authentication request does not go to Active Directory domain services, but goes to the multi-factor authentication server. So that's stuff like LDAP, stuff like Radius is all supported for that. Then a multi-factor authentication server checks your username and password or your Kerberos ticket to the Active Directory. And only, and this is pretty much important because only when you have the right password will the multi-factor authentication server reach out to the authentication service and perform a multi-factor authentication. So if your password is wrong, then it won't cost you money. When your password is right, you get redirected to the multi-factor authentication service. You don't actually see that in an app, and that reaches out to the device that you've registered for multi-factor authentication. When you authenticate to that, then all green arrows appear, and you gain access to the application. It almost looks too easy. You think. But it is easy. So let's dive a bit deeper. So if we have claims-based authentication and we have multi-factor authentication to that, so we can use strong authentication and really make sure it's the person that we think we're talking to, then we can use all the stuff in the claim types that I've shown you earlier and use that in rich authorization scenarios. Because nowadays, if you want to do something with authorization, it's based on group memberships only in Windows, and it's only AND rules. So if I say, well, if you're a member of group 1 and group 2, and group 1 gives you all access, and group 2 gives you only read access, then you have all access. So that's AND rules, AND rules. Then of course there's token bloat with the 1023 group memberships, and cross-organizational access is a nightmare with authorization. So what do we want? We want rich authorization, and we would like to make authorization decision based on any attribute. So with claims, one of the default claims that you can use is if someone is visible in the global address list of your Exchange server. So only if someone has an email address that people see in the list and can email to, that is something that you can use as an authorization decision. The location of the device can be used. The department, the manager. You can have AND rules and OR rules. You can have combinations. You can also have external claims. So in the scenario with Azure Active Directory where you have a double hop claim transformation, you can add claims, and based on the claims that you add, Azure Active Directory can add claims. So we can mess around with that claim quite a lot. Then of course claims can be in tokens and tickets, but I've already shown you that. So let's look at workplace join. Because workplace join, in my opinion, and this is one of the cool stuff in Windows 8.1 and Windows Server 2012 R2, and luckily it's been ported back to Windows 7. Android has it now, iOS does this with profiles. And workplace join is a neat little trick that I can use built-in with ADFS and Windows Server 2012 R2 as an authorization decision. And I can also sell it to my colleagues because it'll give them single sign-on beyond the browser session. So what I've shown you earlier with the Claim app is that I go to the app and I need to authenticate. When I don't close my browser and go to another app, it authenticates me right away. If I close the browser and start the app again, I need to authenticate. If I want to do single sign-on, so without getting all the password boxes, then I need single sign-on beyond the browser session. That's what Workplace Join does. It's funny because Workplace Join is also able to do a Identity 1.0, so Kerberos automatic transformation to SAML and OAuth and all those open standards, which I call Identity 2.0. And you can do that with Workplace Join. So under the hood, what you get is claims. Of course you get claims. Then you get a certificate that is signed by the ADFS server, and you get a cookie. And that cookie is for your browser, so the browser knows what you've done and can store that stuff. The browser is encrypted with the certificate, so that's okay. There's also an object in Active Directory domain services with every workplace joined device. And if you don't use a workplace joined device for, by default, a period of 90 days, it gets deleted. Let's look at that. So this is my domain controller. And in Active Directory, there's a container called registered devices. This is part of the Windows Server 2012 R2 schema for Active Directory. And every time a colleague registers a device as a trusted device, so workplace joined the device, that device gets an object in Active Directory. Now this isn't really that straightforward to manage, but System Center can do stuff with it. But if you look inside the MSDS device, and then go to the attribute editor, then you will see, let me just zoom in on that. The device name is right here, display name. Only Active Directory does not use the display name to display a name. So that's okay. And you can see who joined it. And that's depicted with a SID. So Active Directory knows a lot of stuff about that device. It just doesn't show you. Not in the Active Directory things. And how do you workplace join? Well, that's easy, because this is a Windows 8.1 device. So what I'm doing is I'm going to settings and then change the PC settings. This is all straightforward. I think you know how this works. Then you go to network, and there's an option called workplace. It says enter your ID to get workplace access or turn on device management. So I'll access my name. Like that. Press join. And what it does is it'll show you my ADFS server again. This is just another relying party trust for the enterprise device registration. So let's do that. And I'm workplace joined. Now I can get all other types of claims and stuff like that. And in ADFS, what I've shown you before. Let's see where it's at. This one. With the default authorization stuff, I just went from an unregistered device to a registered device. The combination of my user account on this device is now registered. Workplace join. Another thing that we need is straightforward access. So with authentication and with authorization in place, there's still a lot of stuff that people on iPads and Android devices cannot use yet. So one of them is, for instance, file servers. So Microsoft uses the server message blocker SMB. It's a CIFS implementation of some sort. And it uses ports 135, 139, all the stuff that your service provider will block for you. The other thing is remote procedure call. Remote procedure call is very old. It was conceived before the web was born. And RPC is something that Unix guys created. Microsoft thought it was a good idea, so let's use it. They're now trying to get rid of it, just like Unix guys did. But it does remote Windows functionality and stuff like that. PowerShell is now turning the table on that, so we don't use it. But Power Access is pretty much a problem with other devices than Windows. So in Windows Server 2012 R2, in the file server role, Microsoft introduced work folders. So work folders is a way of getting individual business data, this stuff, onto personal devices, but not using SQL Server or SharePoint Server as the backend, but just a plain old file server. So what people gain is that they have a work folder that they can access using any device. So there's a work folders app for iOS, there's a work folders app for Android. That allows them to access the stuff. On Windows, you get to synchronize your data, and the data on the device that is synchronized, that is all encrypted. I can functionally wipe that because the ADFS server allows me to remove the certificate that is used to decrypt it. So the data will still be on the device, it will just be inaccessible. So that's remote wipe. You can customize the stuff with MDM. It's funny though, because if you use the work folders stuff on Android and iOS, it will tell you, well, you need a password, and you need stuff like this, and you need stuff like that, and you need to comply before you can access your data. You can have Windows authentication or ADFS authentication on it. Of course, if you're doing stuff for iPads and Androids, then ADFS is the preferred way to do that, and you need some DNS records, work folder stuff, domain.tld, for auto discovery, just like Exchange does. And then the other thing that you need is policy-based device management. Because in an Active Directory environment, you can use the group policies, and you can manage all the stuff that is on Windows, and you can manage all the stuff that is right there for you to manage. But iPads, macOS, Android devices, you can't apply your normal group policies to them. There's some third-party apps that allow you to do that, but by default, group policies are Windows only. So you can manage them centrally, but what do you do with iPads, Androids, and Windows RT devices, for instance? Luckily, Windows RT is dead from a management perspective. I still own a couple of them. I think it's nice dead weights. And then there's applications for multiple platforms. So if you have different platforms with different ecosystems, so yes, you can buy apps in Apple, in the Apple ecosystem. And then you switch to a Samsung Galaxy phone or Galaxy Pad. But I just paid for the app. Yep, you pay for the app again. So stuff like that is something that you'll run into. And then, of course, there's different apps for different purposes, or for the same purposes. And not all devices are connected to the network, at least not your network. Most devices, luckily, are connected to the internet, but there might be devices that you're never going to see on your network, ever. So how do you enroll them? How do you manage them? How do you wipe them? Well, there's a standard for that, which is called OpenMDM. And Intune is the product from Microsoft that does that. Intune is a service, and Intune is a service that works with System-Centered Configuration Manager. So if I have on-premises devices, like desktops and laptops, then I can use group policies to manage them, and I can use System-Centered Configuration Manager to manage them. If I use System-Centered Configuration Manager, I have central management and reporting right there. I can tell people to have apps for a certain period of time, and when they no longer have access, I can just remove it. I can use with AppV, all that stuff just works. I can couple System-Centered Configuration Manager with the Intune services to manage devices on the internet. Windows phones, Android, iOS, macOS, Windows 7, 8, 8.1, Windows 10, Windows RT, all that stuff works. And even when I make that connection between the Intune service and System-Centered Configuration Manager, I still get and still remain to have that central management and reporting capability. So how do people get into Intune? Well, in the demo that you saw earlier in Workplace Join, you also said automatically do the device management for me. That's an option you can enable. You can also tell people to download and install the company app portal that Microsoft has for every ecosystem that it supports. that allows for mobile device management and mobile application management. So if I have an app here for certain stuff and it has an iOS or Android version, then I can tell people to enroll their devices to the Intune service and then pick the app from the company portal app, just like that. Couple of solutions. Anything of interest so far? Right. So if you want to bring your own, so if you want to facilitate access to your organizational IT sources with devices owned by employees or by partners, I think you need to address these 4 areas. So you need to go with claims authentication next to your AD with ADFS. You need multi-factor authentication. You need rich authorization so you can make the difference between registered and unregistered devices. Tell between devices on the extranet and devices on the intranet. I think you need to look at straightforward access. So your file server is fine. Just upgrade it to Windows Server 2012 R2 and enable the work folders feature on it. Connect it to your router, your firewall, and get people on iPad and Android access to it. And you need policy-based systems management with centralized reporting. Agree? Questions? Is it that late? All right. Thank you.